and check how long you're using it. Inquire into your motives. Why is it that I spend so much time on? It could be that it's one particular form of social media that's most it might be Instagram, and just ask yourself in a very honest way, why is it that I'm happy scrolling for hours through these photos of my friends, and what am I getting out of that? You see, so that's the first step, is just being honest with yourself and trying to be mindful in your use of social media. And ask yourself, am I getting out of that social media what I was looking for? That's another question. Almost always the answer is, especially if you overuse it, the answer is going to be no. Second, Anna Lemke, she's the author of the book Dopamine Nation. She says it's very useful to use what she calls self-binding strategies. Self-binding, this is actually, the Sanskrit word for this would be tapasya, austerity. But this is not an austerity performed by, sages on a hill or in a cave. This is an austerity that would be helpful for everybody, including even teenage girls and boys. You bind yourself, you restrain yourself in a certain way. How? There are different ways of doing it. Restrict the number of hours or the amount of time you spend on social media every day. That's one way. If you're very young and you're too immature to kind of do that for yourself, maybe your parents are the ones to help you do that self-binding. That's part of good parenting. And parents have to walk a fine line between being too lenient and too strict. So there's a kind of middle ground that I think is a sweet spot for most parents. You have to be very careful. But there are other ways. One simple way to curtail your social media use and make it healthier and more mindful: restrict your social media use only to larger devices. What do I mean? Only tablets or laptops or desktop computers. So what happens? That means I can't use social media on my phone, that 24/7 hypodermic needle. No longer a hypodermic needle for me. Or if that's too crazy an idea, no, I can't think of life without, social media on my phone, at least turn your notifications off. At least for certain times when you're trying to concentrate, at the very least. If you're studying for an exam, if you're at work and you're working on something that requires concentration, even if you're just reading, turn off your notifications for that, put your phone on silent. Simple things like that. Even that's hard for people, but that's what makes it an austerity. Austerity is not meant to be pleasant. Austerity is a form of sattvika sukham. So Gita, in the previous verse, I mentioned rajasika sukham, rajasika happiness. Sattvika sukham is exactly the opposite. Yattad agre vishamiva, pariname mritopamam, tat sukham sattvikam proktam, atma buddhi prasadajam. Sattvika pleasures are like poison in the beginning and like nectar in the end. So exactly the reverse structure of all forms of instant gratification. The opposite of rajasika happiness. And that last phrase is extremely profound from a philosophical and spiritual standpoint. Sattvika pleasures are atma buddhi prasadajam. Sattvika pleasures are born of the satisfaction, the prasada, of the atma and buddhi. The soul within and the higher mind, the intellect. So what does that mean? It means that sattvika sukham is qualitatively different from rajasika sukham. Rajasika happiness, all forms of instant gratification, they gratify what? The body and or the mind. That's it. Body-mind complex. Just ask yourself, whatever the form of instant gratification, it gratifies either the body or the mind or both at the same time. Sattvika forms of happiness gratify the deeper soul and the higher mind, the higher intellect within, which makes it qualitatively and not just quantitatively. It's not a difference in degree, it's a difference in kind. Which is why if you can populate your life with more and more sattvika forms of happiness, sattvika forms of joy, automatically you will be happier as a result. That's the Gita's recipe, secret for happiness. That's part of it at least. And the Gita itself gives an example. It gives many examples of sattvika forms of happiness. One is any form of spiritual practice. Any of the 4 yogas taught in Vedanta. Raja Yoga, which is a yoga of meditation, concentration. Mindfulness meditation falls under that. It's a very popular kind of meditation these days. Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, scriptural study, reflection on your true nature as the Atman. Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion. Karma Yoga, the yoga of selfless action. Through any of these, all of these are sattvika forms of joy. They're qualitatively different from instant gratification because the joy you get from it is the joy of the soul. Because when you engage in these activities, these spiritual practices, you're becoming a better person as a result, you're becoming less selfish, and you are better able to identify with the deeper soul within. But we don't have to think in such a rarefied. Of course, it's very important to do spiritual practice, but what about, here's a common mistake that I find that many spiritual aspirants make. They restrict their spiritual life to the meditation room or their prayer room, their shrine. And they wake up in the morning, they sit for meditation for 15 minutes or 20 minutes, usually distracted or tired, and that's their spiritual practice. Then they come out, then they have to raise their kids, then they have to argue with their spouse, then they have to commute to work, then they have to work with their coworkers. Then life begins. And then what? Maybe at the end of the day when they come back, they enter the meditation room again, and then that's my spiritual practice. So they bifurcate their life into spiritual and secular, or spiritual and the rest of life. One of Nivedita, Sister Nivedita's greatest insights in her introduction to the complete works of Swami Medhananda, she says, one of the most radical things that Swami Medhananda taught is henceforth no distinction between sacred and secular. No distinction between sacred and secular. Every moment of life needs to be spiritualized. That's what Vedanta teaches. So you have to ask yourself, what do I do outside of the meditation room? You see? So outside the meditation room, when you commute to work, do you listen to music? If so, what kind of music? Is it Rajasika music? Is it Sattvika music? Do you listen to bhajans, stotras, which make you more spiritual? Or is it a Billboard top 10, which is more tends to be more Rajasic? What do I mean by Rajasika music? Rajasika music, I can almost guarantee you, 8 out of the 10, the top 10 in the Billboard is going to be, the lyrics are going to be very worldly. It'll involve, I'm in love with you, why aren't you in love with me? Or, I love you, why did you break up with me? Or, who needs you, I hate you? Or, life goes on even though you've left me. 90% of pop songs are about these themes. What happens when you listen to it? And they have very catchy beats, they've got strong bass lines. Those bass lines tap into the kind of lower instincts. And you want to dance, that's the idea. So you want to get up and you see. And that, again, it's a kind of indoctrination. Those are the things that matter in life. Whether I'm happy in my love life, or so-and-so broke up with me, or I miss you so much, why don't you miss me, blah, blah, blah. All has to do with the body-mind. How many lyrics in pop songs are spiritual? There are some, but they're rare exceptions, is what I'd say. They're rare exceptions. Movies. If you go to see a movie, what kind of movie are you watching? And so this 3 gunas paradigm is extremely helpful. And I always say my 2 desert island books are Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna and the Gita. And you'll find that one of the keynotes of both of these scriptures is the 3 gunas. Sri Ramakrishna is constantly talking about the 3 gunas. Bhagavan Krishna in the Gita is constantly talking about the 3 gunas. And they both classify different activities, different kinds of behavior in terms of the 3 gunas. So that would be a separate talk. I've given the talk in other places. But if you want details, type in Medhananda 3 gunas and you'll find it. But you can literally classify everything you do throughout the day based on the 3 gunas. How you interact with your spouse, let's say. What would be a very Rajasic way of interacting with your spouse? High drama. It's both are very emotional. You get angry with each other. You lose your temper quickly. You get irritated. Rajasic. What's a more sattvic kind of? And secondly, the other thing that's very distinctive of a Rajasic kind of relationship with your romantic partner or life partner is unhealthy codependence. You're way too dependent on each other. I've seen cases where when one spouse dies, the other person dies shortly thereafter because they can't live without the other person. That's an unhealthy codependence. But we don't have to be that dramatic. Even assuming that both are still alive, if one person has a business trip and has to leave for 3 days, the other person freaks out. They'll constantly be texting and emailing and this and that. So a more sattvic kind of relationship is one where you're not as clingy, not as dependent on the other person. You can be best friends, you can love each other, and yet without that kind of extreme dependence and selfish attachment. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called 4 Loves. And he used a beautiful analogy to contrast what he calls erotic love with the love of friendship. He says that erotic love, the love of eroticism, is as if two people are face to face with each other. Because what happens when you're face to face? You forget about the rest of the world. And then the clinging and the unhealthy codependence, all that starts. The love of friendship is like walking side by side with somebody. Each of you has your own path, your own journey. You're side by side and you're supporting each other. Yet you're outward facing, you're facing the world, and you're not as clingy, not as dependent on the other person. But you're helping each other nonetheless, but in a more sattvic way. How are you raising your kids? What's a Rajasic way of parenting? Helicopter parenting. Hovering over them, not giving them the space that they need to grow into their best selves. Being kind of dictatorial as a parent and telling them, if not explicitly, then implicitly, I want you to be X, Y, and Z. I want you to do X, Y, and Z. I want you to major in so-and-so. I'm speaking from personal experience. My dad forced me to major in computer science when I first enrolled at Berkeley. And I was pretty good at it. But it wasn't my passion. And at the end of the first year, I was hanging out with one of my good friends. And I told him, I was like, I'm fine. Computer science is okay, but it's just not what I love. He goes, what is it that you love? I said, well, I was taking these English and philosophy classes at the same time. I said, I really like those classes. He said, then why don't you change your major? And it hadn't occurred to me myself, honestly, because I have this Bengali mindset, like do whatever your parents tell you. And it took this white American to tell me, to knock some sense into me. Why don't I change it? And it never occurred to me to change my major until he told me. I was like, you know what? Yeah, why don't I change my major? And I changed my major to English and philosophy. And the rest is history.